For several decades, the home of Rob Reiner and Michelle was no secret to the public, and had been looked upon as the epitome of the close-knit and long-lasting Hollywood family. They had 4 children in the Brentwood neighborhood, loving family gatherings and a life that was so serene that nothing could possibly upset it. But the night of the 14th of December arrived with the stealth of an icy sword. It was in that very home that the terrible tragedy took the lives of the son and daughter-in-law of Rob Reiner for good. As the police started their inquiry and his son Nick was arrested as a possible suspect in the crime, it was as if just another sad chapter in the book of life was soon to be closed. But the silence was short-lived. Soon after, the adopted daughter of the Reiner family, a daughter that Rob loved as though she was blood from his own bloodline and from his own flesh and veins, shocked the very air with announcements that shook the shades of the public's opinion. She talked of the unsigned will, the things that he had not yet been able to voice, the apology that was too late, and the pain that had been carefully masked under the facade of the very peaceful life that the family led. "If Dad had only lived for just one more day," cried the daughter, "maybe things would not have been pushed to the point that has happened now." Before the public sentiment could even settle from the previous shock, the very daughter that was produced from the loins of Rob Reiner and Michelle had something to say with an altogether different twist to the bad news, as if throwing oil onto the blaze of the suspicions. As she said, it was very likely that the source of the whole disaster for the family could be found in the fact that Rob was treating none of his children fairly. Rob Reiner was a man who was renowned not only for his incredible directing skills in the silver screen, but was notorious for being the kind of father who could and did prioritize only the needs of his family members. Despite his extremely busy life that was filled with the enormous success that he had witnessed with his legendary films, he never made an exception in ensuring that with the 4 that he had in his family, accompanying and caring for them was at the forefront of his own personal life. Tracy, the daughter from his previous relationship who he had adopted as his own, and Jake, Nick, and Romy from the 3 that he shared with his wife of the moment, Michelle Singer Reiner. Their love for the children expressed itself not in mere words of advice or care in everyday activities, but in a silent yet constant flow that ran as an undertone in each moment of their entire lives, from childhood on. "You children are my entire world," he told Tracy one time in a trembling, yet demonstratively true, voice. "I will always be there in your corner, no matter what. Always." To his adoptive daughter, Rob, his complete love and regard were given. He always considered her as his own child, ready to listen, protect, and spend ordinary simple moments of everyday life together. On calm evenings, he would spend time with Tracy, sitting between Rob and herself, asking her questions about business and life, as if trying to remind her that no matter difficult the path ahead of her would be, she could ever have a strong foundation behind her, as long as he, Rob, would still be in her corner. "I know you can take care of yourself, but I'm here whenever you need me," Rob told her once, and she could clearly experience the feelings of safety, as if some sort of love, surrounding her, covered all aspects of her being. Jake, the senior of all, got Rob as his companion, in the interest of baseball as an activity conducted as a spiritual gift passed down from his own grandfather Carl Reiner. From Carl, down the line, from Rob to Jake, that same gift expressed itself with uncommon tenderness. Together, they would visit most of the Major League Baseball stadiums in the entire United States of America. There, gathered with Rob, Jake, in each place, Rob would experience moments so unforgettable, yet so moving. We did not visit all these Major League places for mere enjoyment of baseball. I did it hoping as I could get more closely involved with my own offspring, trying in some peculiar manner I could instill in him, in Jake, an unspoken message, namely that of love and of values culminating. Each game, in each visit, I made an attempt, in an obscure fashion. I just showed him, in an unspoken language, this one, I am hey. I am with you. I love you. Have these in mind, in each of these places, that will remain as emphatic memories in each of these places I get more closely involved with my own Jake. I shoot these moments as if I am aiming at eternity. I do not want these moments lost, in time. I want these moments in each of these places immemorial, as eternity will live. There, in a manner that no one will ever realize, in each of these places, in each of these moments, Rob would look at Jake, smiling. You see, sometimes I learn a lot from you, Jake. Sometimes I do. Most special of all, though, was the youngest daughter, Romy, who always received the best care and the best listening from her father and mother. Rob spent plenty of time just listening to his daughter talk about her concerns, dreams, and disappointments, making sure that little Romy always knew she was loved and taken care of. "I'll always be here, Romy. No matter where you go or what you do," he said, looking at her with tear-filled eyes. "I will never leave you." This, along with the warmth of his embracing hugs, became the deep emotional anchor that would stick with her throughout her adolescence and teenage years. With Nick, though, this was an entirely different story, one of tension, turmoil, instability, and deep pain. Rob Reiner loved his son with the love that was always patient and desperate at the same time, like a father who was forever caught in the torment of a lost love. As Nick grew from a boy into a young man, this love of Rob was always matched by the deep pain that would exhibit itself in a worst-case scenario situation that would leave a father's heart forever lost and troubled. There had always existed, beginning in early childhood, a distance that had nothing to do with words. This distance was hard to express, hard perhaps even for the three of them, the son, the father, and the mother, to fully explain. The commonality of shared passions or interests between the father and son had always eluded them, and the sense of harmony that the father had been able to sense with the other children had seemed far, far away from the son, Nick. Rob was rooted in traditional value systems and structured environments. However, with Nick, the son who had always had the early bearing of rebellion and instability, Rob would often be seen on some of the darkest of late-night hours sitting silently waiting for the son to come back home. The eyes would be glued on the turning hands of the clocks, with the father torturing himself again and again, asking the question, "What could I possibly be doing so wrong?" When Nick was just 15, the narcotics began seeping into the young life of the son, starting from heroin, then coke, then soon plunging into serious and chronic addiction. The father and mother had only the opportunity of seeing their son go and come from rehabilitation centers more than a dozen times, along with the torture of homelessness as the lost soul wandered from state to state, and then, of course, the near-death experience, which would be seen hovering above their son again and again. Each of these struggles broke the father's heart anew, smothering him with fear and the wordless sensation of helplessness. Rob, fighting to draw his son back from the brink of the abyss, discovered what he thought constituted tough love. He took Nick to rehabilitation against his will, going as far as withholding financial support to force the boy to endure the consequences of what he had done. Later, Rob himself revealed that this proved the worst decision of his entire life. "We trusted in the expertise of people whose degrees lined the walls of their offices more than in our son's truth. They told us Nick was manipulating us, and we accepted it. In this, there existed the deep remorse of a father, sensing too late that, in his misdirected concern, he had inadvertently driven his child further toward the abyss. The distance between the two increased, eruption after eruption, the silences, the pain, the wounds, the frustration, the anger. Years passed when Nick opted to live out the life of the streets instead of going home. While Rob and Michelle lived in constant torment, wondering if their son even lived through any given day, blowout arguments, unspoken words, and shared pain expanded the distance between them, making reconciliation even more difficult. The release of the movie Being Charlie in 2015 offered a light at the end of the tunnel. Rob acted as the director, and Nick wrote the screenplay, which contained a heavy dose of semi-autobiographic material taken from Nick's life. The entire process brought the reluctant duo face-to-face, sparring in hot arguments, now at last forcing them into the act of truly listening to one another. Rob himself stated, "There were times when it became very intense, when we were at each other's throats, yelling. But it gave me a deeper understanding of what Nick went through." Nick admitted, too, that working together on the film had altered a number of issues, healing, if only in a partial way, the ruin within the relationships between the two. Yet, the hot tension never really went away. Although Nick had periods of successfully staying sober and living in the guest house on his parents' property, the struggles with his mental health and the risk of relapse simmered just below the surface. Michelle finally confessed to some of her friends that they had tried every option available and were slowly starting to run out of steam not only physically but also mentally. Just the night before the tragedy at the Christmas bash hosted by Conan O'Brien himself at his office Christmas party that night, on the 13th of December, 2025, the seemingly festive and joyous mood at the party with the twinkling lights and ringed with the joyous sound of merrymakers was about to shatter. Rob Reiner brought along his son, but the tension between the two was only too visible. Rob was so angry with his son that he had no choice but to scold him in front of the packed hall about the things he was doing that he found simply unacceptable. This was something that Rob could not tolerate. In front of the packed hall of people, Rob shouted at his son, his words dripping with anger and exasperation. "I can't protect you if you are going to live the life you are leading," he said before he turned his back and walked out, leaving his son alone and isolated at the Christmas bash. This would later be remembered by those who were there at this critical juncture, when the final straw was perhaps placed. This was perhaps at this stage that the final straw was placed, when every attempt at reconciliation, every act of forgiveness, every hope had been abandoned. This was perhaps the night of Christmas, the night of togetherness. For Rob and his son, this night was of utmost loneliness. On the 14th of December, 2025, the tragedy finally struck. Hollywood was left shaken to the core, having been left distraught at the news of the homicide of the seemingly so close-knit family. Based on the preliminary outcome of investigation results, Nick Reiner was quickly pinpointed as a major suspect, as there were reports to indicate that he was in a tumultuous condition as a result of his addiction and anger issues. The police indicated that during a moment of no control, Nick rushed into the kitchen to grab a common household knife referred to as the large knife that was commonly used by his mother to slice vegetables and meat. With such a sharp knife in hand, he attacked his mother first. This left her with serious injuries that led to her death as a result of blood leaks. Rob Reiner heard the commotion and rushed to the scene to offer his support as a means of protecting his wife. However, he was also attacked by his brother and suffered fatal neck and chest injuries from the knife. The whole episode took place in a very brief explosion of events filled with sadness and despair. The youngest daughter of the Reiner family, Romy Reiner, was the first to discover her parents lying dead upon her return to the house at 3:30 p.m. She immediately called the authorities. The suspect showed up at the scene but was apprehended a few hours later by the lab at the University of Southern California. The suspect had been arrested with no bail as he was charged with the murder of his two parents. While the investigation was still under process, forensic analysis had confirmed that the evidence was in line with the common household knife found at the site. This was fast emerging as the most terrible thing that can happen to come to a closure on a family's never-ending fight to come out of the darkness of addiction. Nick's arrest brought a tightened sense of mourning at a faster rate. Mourners not only mourned the death of Rob Reiner and his wife, but the thought of a family tragedy having its roots in broken family ties that had never had the opportunity to mend. This emerging evidence can now become marked as the most painful ending to a father and a son's relationship, as was earlier defined with love and hope. And as the Christmas lights began to go out one at a time, a broken family and a broken father and a broken son's legacy was all that was left behind, with questions left unanswered. However, worse than all those losses was the point at which the adopted daughter, Tracy Reiner, finally opened her mouth to speak. Her words caused the whole world to hold their collective breath, because it was revealed that truth was nowhere near what people had assumed for so long. Following the death of Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner, it took Hollywood a while to overcome its collective shock, still grieving and processing the unthinkable loss when Tracy Reiner finally decided to speak out about the whole thing for the first time. The words were shaking and stumbling, as if with every word spoken, Tracy was ripping away at memories. Tracy stated that the pain had come far too soon, far too quickly, and none of the people involved had any chance to prepare for it beforehand. Only days before the unfortunate death, Tracy could still catch glimpses of her father when Rob Reiner was very much alive and in the flesh. Catch glimpses of his laughter and his chatty merriment about the most mundane aspects of life itself. There had certainly been no sign of this devastating end to it all beforehand. "I had just seen my dad last week." Tracy was crying as she spoke. But it was just that moment when the truth seemed to prove to be even crueler than it had seemed before. When asked to speak to NBC News about it all, Tracy had struggled to hide how shocked she was about it all. "I come from the most wonderful family." Tracy was sobbing as she was completely breaking down. "I don't even know what to say. I'm still in shock." These weren't words of public vendetta, just a natural response to a child who had just had the rug ripped away from her feet to find herself really and truly thrust out of the comfortable world that she had assumed was hers to forever possess and hold. Michelle and Rob Reiner were the best parents any child could actually ask for, shared Tracy Reiner later about her deceased father and stepmother to the media, as she was still in shock from it all. Although consumed with motion pictures that were later to be recognized as some of the greatest films of all time, It was his children who were his greatest concern at all times, to his very core and soul, as a loving father to his children. His dream was to raise his children to be honest, to learn how to love other people, because it only takes 1 second to knock an individual down, to learn how to stand up again after one falls down to their knees. Michelle Reiner had the heart of an actual photographer and producer, because through her gentle soul, it was always her who was listening to all members of her own little family with the gentle listening ears of an expert producer listening through their ears that always like to create life, through their very special place in life itself, because Michelle Reiner was the actual pillar of strength for her entire family, because through her incredible soul, it was always her who wanted to aim for only the very best, to reach the heights of the stars, because through her incredible listening ears, Michelle was able to bring life to all her members of her little nuclear family, because through her actual incredible place in life, it was always Michelle who liked to bring life to her members, because Michelle Reiner had the ability to bring life through her actual incredible soul that liked to aim high, because Michelle Reiner they were able to create a life that is filled with laughter, even though they sometimes face tough, unavoidable challenges. The hardest thing that Tracy found about the interview is talking about Nick. Tracy said that Nick's parents loved Nick, perhaps even loved him more than they loved their own children, with worry,